That was author Brad Meltzer. I urge everybody to buy that book, House of Secrets. Tony Simone can't put it down. He's ignoring me and reading it in the studio as I chatter on. But on to better things. Well, not better than Brad, but one of my favorite things of all time is eating steak. And we have with us Chef Andy Kitko, who's the executive chef at STK, which has really redefined the steakhouse for me. It's ambiance and good food, which is a rarity instead of like a butcher block table with a waiter in an apron that throws the plate in front of you. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you. Welcome.
So my grandfather was in the restaurant business, and he always said, there's no way you're ever going to get a steak at home that's going to be as good as at a restaurant because they age it and they have better meat and a hotter oven. Was he right?
I would say yes.
And Mel Brooks said he'd rather have a mediocre meal at a restaurant than a great meal at home.
Well, I guess you're right. But if you know a couple of tricks, a little bit of know-how, and you can come pretty close, I think.
Now, tell me about what makes STK unique, and what do you do differently than everybody else?
Well, STK distinguishes itself by focusing on a social experience with a sleek contemporary design and an in-house DJ. So it's a really unique blend of ambiance with great food and great music.
That's
and a great
lot.
vibe.
So you can eat a steak and dance.
You mentioned
it turns into a dance party quite often.
Okay, and here's a question that I've found the answer to is what is a cowboy steak? Why do they call it a cowboy steak?
A cowboy, I think it's because it's really large. So it's a really large bone-in ribeye. We serve one that is 32 ounces. So it's pretty generous.
Is it? You could pick it up, I guess, on the
yeah.
If you're sitting out on the prairie somewhere.
There's a good amount of the chop on there, the rib on there that you certainly can pick it up and eat it if you wanted to.
Well, the one thing about New York, I mean, it was always seemed to be the city for great steak, but I noticed that on trips to LA that steakhouses there were very different because it was more of a scene. And you guys have done that in New York now more so than any other steakhouse.
That's correct. And we're also national, so we have restaurants all over the U.S. and we're expanding. We have in Los Angeles, Washington D.C., Atlanta, Miami, and soon to be Toronto. So,
not that we want to drive people away from dining out, but summer's is approaching, or are we officially in summer? What's the best way to grill? What can we do at home? You have any secrets for us?
Well, certainly. I mean, there's a couple of key areas, and one of the biggest things is to start with a really hot grill. The hotter that you can get it, the better off.
I'm taking notes because I always mess up the steak at the grill at the beach house.
I prefer a live fire or charcoal over gas. I think that you get a better heat, and also you get some of the smoke and the quality of the actual fire. So I mean that's great. So you get your coals really, really hot. You wait till they burn down and become very, very red and glowing, and you're ready to go. Also, a key thing to do is, especially when dealing with larger steaks, if you want to cook a cowboy at home, is to take it out of the refrigerator and let it come to room temperature before you actually grill it. That kind of gives it a chance to temper and become so you're not putting like an ice cold steak on the hot grill.
What about marinating and aging? Can you do anything about that at home?
Aging, you would have to buy something that's aged. It has to be in a very controlled environment, at a certain temperature and a certain humidity level. But marinating for sure, absolutely. There's dry spices, wet spices, wet rubs you can use.
Do you do wet or dry aging, and what's the difference?
We do both at the restaurant. Wet age is just about all meat is wet aged. It helps to tenderize the meat, but the dry age is really what makes the meat special. You basically you're losing water content and you're intensifying the flavors that are in the steak. So there's a lot of shrinkage, so that's why it's so expensive. But you're also developing enzymes that make great flavors.
So there was a big article a number of years ago about Spark Steakhouse because they had a different aging process, and whereas all the other steakhouses in New York were doing a dry age, and Gallagher's used to have their meat locker. I don't know if they still do, or you could see it from the street. People used to just go stare at the beef and salivate. But there was a big battle over what's better and which is the most effective way. How do you age a steak?
Well, you put it into, it has to be in a refrigerated room, has to be 41 degrees at all times to avoid any kind of bacteria, but also your humidity level has to be really low as well. So, and you need good air circulation. So we use a couple of purveyors that exclusively dry age for us, and there's a waiting list to get into the dry aging room.
And are you allowed to reveal who that purveyor is?
Sure, it's DeBraga. DeBraga and Splitter they're located out in New Jersey.
Yeah, there was a special recently on one of the big purveyors and how they age, and we're really obsessed now, this country, with grilling and all the competition. It's like bizarre how people are obsessed with it. I once did a documentary like 20 years ago. I'm always way ahead of the curve on food and the food industry, and somebody from Chase Bank where they did loans for restaurants said people have to eat and people have to go to the bathroom, so if you sell food or toilet paper, you're always going to make a living. How many STKs are there in New York City?
There are two in New York City. The one I work at is in Midtown near Bryant Park in the Grace Building. It's 1114 6th Avenue. And then we have another location in New York that is in the meatpacking district. And
is there a website we can go to?
Yeah, there is. It's www.stkhouse.com. That's STKHOUSE.com.
And now, do you have a favorite cut of beef?
I do. It's the ribeye.
That's your go-to steak?
That's my go-to, but we're celebrating June. In June, it's National Steakhouse Month, so we're doing a special ribeye. It's a rib cap, so it's just the cap that is on the ribeye. It's on the bottom part of it, away from the bone when you're usually looking at it. Mm-hmm. But it's the most flavorful, and very tender and highly marbled part of the ribeye.
What are you running any promotions for Steak Month?
Yeah, we're featuring this steak. It's an 8-ounce rib cap steak with a green garlic butter and pickled mushrooms. It's for $46.
That's a deal.
We're going to have to go after the show.
I know. I'm getting very hungry. So how do you stay so fit? Do you sample your wares every day?
You got to taste every day. That's right.
So you have to take a lot of statins every night. I couldn't imagine what my cholesterol would be if I had your job, although I'm envious. So, well, thanks so much for joining us, and I recommend that everybody go to STK ASAP. Thanks so much for coming in, Andy.